Hello everyone, so about a week or so ago, I made a video discussing Big Brother Canada 7 and my opinions on it after a rewatch, and now it is time for me to make the tier ranking video where I discuss all of the cast as players and their potential and what they did in the season and rank them based on whether they are good or not. In general, I don't want to waste much time talking about this season, so I'm just going to get right to it. So the Abysmal tier are the people who are the worst of the worst, and I don't see them doing well under any circumstance. At 15, I have Mackie. He was able to have half of the house voting for him to stay, but it was not because of the campaigning that he did, but it was due to the work of someone else, and he was supposed to be safe anyways, so he actively lost votes due to his antics. He is also one of the worst strategic players ever, since he went out of his way to mention out loud to the people that he was targeting them, and he didn't have a poker face whatsoever. And whenever he did decide to do some campaigning to stay, it actively made things worse for himself. Mackie was kind of good in competitions, so I could see him being somewhat like a Hope or something as his best ceiling, but he will probably self-sabotage more often than not, and trying to be like Hope in this current season isn't a good thing anyways. Even if he was brought into a majority alliance, I see himself self-sabotaging himself out of that good position and them targeting him earlier than necessary anyways. So the final person in this tier is Laura. We really don't have much to go off of with her, not only because there are no live feeds in the first week, but I also don't think she got much camera time, especially compared to some other first boots in her 2 episodes. Apparently, she had a hard time fitting in with the other house guests. They did show in the episode that she couldn't have fun with them, and we know from what the others said afterwards that she went way too hardcore against Samantha, who was close to the HOH, and Adam, who was the HOH. In her eviction interview, she claimed that she was too honest and not being able to be fake, and that's a huge problem in Big Brother, and that's a problem that will come up no matter what season you're put into. So if you're not good at that, you probably won't be good at this game no matter what. The next tier is the bad tier, and there are a lot of people from this season in this tier, and I think half the cast fits this tier if I remember correctly. So obviously these people are not the worst of the worst, but they have a lot of negative traits in Big Brother, and even if they're put on other seasons, they still wouldn't do well due to their negative skill sets. At 13th is Eddie. He is yet another person that I can't say much about, partially due to his under-edit throughout the season, but another part of it is due to the fact that he wasn't in any notable alliance, and even on the feet he didn't do much, so there wasn't much for me to go off of. It seemed like his strategy was to somewhat kiss up to people and to lay under the radar, which in itself isn't bad, but it's clear that he didn't have the social game to back it up, and there's nothing notable strategically that showed that he would be a good player. I do think that English being his second language caused him to struggle with bonding with people and making game and personal relationships in the house, and I can see that being a huge problem if he's put on any other season, or a lot of other seasons. At 12th is Kiera. So she was able to have allies like Estefania, Damien, Dane, which fizzled out during her final week, and somewhat Kaylin and Mackie, so she was able to get into a group of some sort who wouldn't target her at all. So she has that positive with being in actual alliances and having some strong relationships. At the same time, most of the other side of the house didn't like her whatsoever, and whenever they would make attempts to align or build a bridge with herself, she completely blew it due to her tunnel vision, emotional-based game, and her poor reads on what was happening in the house. She was also relatively expendable within her own group, where she was never going to be kept beside any of her allies, and built a target for herself in comparison to her allies for being a larger personality than the likes of Estefania and Damien. I don't see herself reflecting and improving on her fault if she ever played again, and I have her revisionist history that she did after her time in the season to validate me on this. At 11th is the other Kira. They were very emotional, had vampire energy sucking tendencies, and was a sympathy beggar, and was just horrible socially. They drained almost everyone they spoke to, and was a target in week 2 due to their behavior, which also took place in week 1, leading up to that week. While they did end up staying in a situation where they would have gone home most times, it wasn't due to anything that they did to save themselves. And because Kira stayed, no one considered them a target for the rest of the season, since everyone saw them as a goat that had absolutely no chance in winning. The emotional meltdowns and exhaustion never stopped throughout the season. The gaslighting of several people didn't either. They rubbed people the wrong way the entire season, and when things didn't go their way, they became increasingly smug, entitled, braggadocious, and unlikable. They were strategically manipulated by Adam and Anthony the entire season, and just when you think they're going to catch on to what happens in the house, where there were moments where Kira did catch on, they let their emotions and the others manipulating them completely get in the way. They weren't good at competitions, and I see them either being an early boot or a goat in every season they were put in, or they would be put in. At 10th place is Corey. Honestly, I think she's one of the most forgettable people in Big Brother Canada in general. She did have the advantage of coming into the house in week 2 and was essentially invincible the second week as well, but this also became a disadvantage because she did not start with everyone else. Overall, I don't think it had much to do with how her game played out, so it kind of neutralizes itself. I don't think she blended in with a lot of the house guests well, since many of them thought she was a lot older than her actual age, and because of that, she was treated like many of the older women in BBCAN historically were treated. It also just seemed like she was expendable to everyone, hence the backdoor attempt on her in week 5. Also, it became clear that her social game very much tanked during her last few weeks of the house, where many of them were making fun of her obnoxiousness at many points. Where we did see her strategically, it wasn't good. Her idea to rat out Kaylin to get in close with Chelsea, Adam, and Samantha was smart on paper, but she never actively aligned with them or used it as a positive or to her advantage overall. She was talked into backdooring Samantha on her HOH based on a lie, and she was so sure about it, which means her instincts suck, and actively removed the one person who wanted to work with her. And it became clear that she leaned too hard onto Anthony strategically and wasn't very confident with her own instincts. At 9th is Kaylin, and I almost didn't put her in this tier, meaning I almost put her in a higher tier. She was the most shocking person for me to rewatch as a player. While I don't think she's a good player and will struggle in any season, mainly due to her age and standing out a bit too much, she wasn't awful like how I thought she was before this rewatch. I definitely see scenarios where she does pretty well on Big Brother seasons, and I think she shows more potential than many other older BB players from BBCAN. Kaylin's social game actually wasn't bad, at all. Dane and Anthony actually had a good relationship with her and were sad about disappointing her with the Mackie vote, and she got closer to the Kira, Estefania, and Damien side of the house. I completely forgot about that. But she also had poor relationships with Samantha, Adam, Chelsea, and especially Kira, which ended up biting her in the butt. She did know that keeping Mackie was good for her game, fought for what she wanted, and managed to convince about half of the house to vote along with it, when half the house wanted something else. It was persuasion that most of the house never had throughout the season, so I'll give her props for that. But she was still on the wrong side of the vote, and it put a target on her back for being a quote-unquote mastermind. And that, in addition to all the other stuff I discussed with her, just led to her early ouster in the season. At 8th place is Damien. When I make my conclusion video, I'm probably going to have to split up the bad tier into 2 or 3 tiers, since there are definitely different layers in this tier. So overall, I had a hard time placing him, since while he didn't do much that was bad in itself or as self-sabotage, he didn't really do anything that was good either in the game. He got the advantage of watching the house guests for a few minutes, and he didn't really do anything with seeing Adam and Dane blatantly aligning with one another. And actually, him somewhat trying to talk to them and not even make allegiances with them put him on the block in the very first week by Adam. He continuously didn't say much for several weeks and refused to speak game with many people, which made it easier for him to be nominated. And many people mentioned that he never spoke, which caused the relationships with him to suffer. It's weird that he was never really seen as a side piece or a main side piece to a pretty boy. Damien is a nice guy and had somewhat decent relationships with everyone in the house, but I don't really remember him ever using his social game to his advantage. He got somewhat close to Adam, but that went nowhere, to the point where Adam felt like he was carrying Damien, and I don't recall any other relationships that he built that helped him in the house, outside of somewhat Dane, but Dane was looking out for Estefania and not really Damien. He just had a complete lack of care for the game, didn't care to game, and while being nice is good, he didn't use his social capital whatsoever. He was way too passive, to the point that people actively got annoyed with him, and I don't see him caring enough to actively improve on his fault, and I could see this being his best ceiling. If anything, he kind of benefited from there being a boys' alliance, since the format of a boys' alliance obviously meant that most of their targets will be women, so it caused most of the powerful men to focus on getting the woman out of the house. And the final person in this tier at 7th is Estefania. She is someone I generally don't want to discuss in any capacity, but I have to. To her benefit, I rarely see a scenario where she is an early boot, but just because you're not an early boot doesn't mean you're a good player, or have potential. When it comes to her potential and abilities, I don't think she's good at all, quite frankly. I think she was the most strategically dense, naive, and unaware woman in the house, refused to even read any of the signs pertaining to what was actually happening in the house, shot everything down immediately, and played a very personnel-based game, and was catty towards a lot of the women in the house. It was clear that she wanted Dane to carry her throughout the season, which might have worked in a non-gender-based season, but that wasn't the season she was a part of. She did not win a single cup in the season, though she was close to winning some, so she didn't even get the same level of respect some of the other houseguests had for women like Samantha and Corey. She was stuck on targeting the girls and Adam all season long, and lacked complete agency the entire time, though she would tell others that she knew that Dane and herself were separate and had their own strategies, but she just didn't utilize it at all. There was no awareness with her, and she's just way too passive. Because of the lack of awareness overall, I don't even know if she would learn from her mistakes or short fallings if she were to come back in general, hence her being in this tier. We are moving on to the potential tier, and these are players that I think are very inconsistent players and could do very well in some seasons and can do very poorly in other seasons, and they have a lot of pretty good and pretty bad qualities, especially compared to some of the people who made it further than them in the season. At 6th is Chelsea. I remember everyone being really hyped about her in the beginning of the season, and that she was going to be some huge player in the game, and I do think some of it was warranted, but she ended up being massively disappointing. It did seem like she had a lot of relationships in the first few weeks with a lot of the house guests, and it did seem like she knew Adam could be a shield for her, but I think she overestimated her position in the house and caused her to be too complacent during her HOH and final week. She did have some idea that the guys were working together, and I like that she started holding back from Adam when that realization came to be, but she didn't completely toss him away. Also, she actively tried to get the girls together in a more subtle way, and to get them to protect one another, but of course it didn't work out. I also think that her targeting Kaylin was a complete choke, and her rationale was about trying to keep the peace together wasn't it, especially when she didn't even maintain all of her relationships during her HOH. I do think she has an idea of when and where she went wrong, and can self-reflect enough to actually learn from her mistakes if she were to return, hence her being on this tier. I don't think she's in general a mediocre player, but she can go all over the place and has more potential than the people below her. At 5th is Samantha, and it's really shocking that she ended up being the highest non-pretty boy on this ranking video, especially since her journey in the season as a player was very turbulent from the very start. She intimidated a lot of people with her mere presence, to the point of Laura throwing her under the bus hardcore, and Dane, Anthony, and Mark, in addition to many others, wanting to target her as early as week 2. Despite all of her efforts and building solid relationships with people like Adam, Chelsea, Kira, and even somewhat Corey, people just did not trust her, and she sketched them out. Despite everything, Sam never gave up and always tried. She went out of her way to make deals that she needed to make and to repair relationships with people like Dane, Kira, and Estefania, even when they blatantly shut the door in her face, but it showed her resilience, and it showed that she was able to move on from past events where many BB players refused to do so. I could see this adaptability and being willing to do so would serve her well in a lot of seasons. Shockingly, at least for me during this rewatch, Samantha was often on point when it came to reading people, their motivations, and knowing when and if something is wrong. Adam blatantly lied to her when she knew that she was in danger of being backdoored in week 2 because everyone was avoiding her while watching the veto competition, picked out that there was a guys alliance, even though Adam was lying to her about it, and knew that she was in danger when Corey was HOH, and knew that she could not afford to listen to Adam much on her own HOH, in addition to Dane being a really good liar. In general, though, she's just way too inconsistent overall for me to place her anywhere else. The mediocre tier is pretty self-explanatory. It's the standard, average tier. Not good, not bad, not really notable in any discernible way. Unsurprisingly to no one, at 4th is Mark. I can't believe that I'm ranking him the 4th best on the cast, especially because I don't feel very highly of his skill set and potential as a player. One of the main reasons why he ended up being this high on this list is mainly comes from him being a part of the Pretty Boy Alliance, meaning that he was given a lot more information than everyone else in the house that wasn't a part of the Alliance. I keep on thinking that he would probably be like many of the others pertaining to his skill set if he wasn't in the Alliance. Mark seemed like he had enough awareness, which wasn't much, but it was more than the others, to see that in order for him to win, he would have to take out the big dogs, which is his own alliance, and he thought this very early on, which did shock me, but he voted very quickly, without any real convincing really, and was more than willing to follow Anthony to the end, to the point where Anthony even controlled his HOH and who he put up as a replacement nominee. I don't remember him offering much strategically to the Alliance, and he was kind of a yes man to Dane and Anthony, and it was the other three who brought their social and strategic capital to the Alliance. It wasn't until rewatching the season where I completely forgot how poor his social game was, especially with the people who weren't in his Alliance. Most of the people that weren't in the Pretty Boy Alliance didn't like him and wanted him targeted in the middle of the season, but he was protected by his Alliance. His interactions with many of the house guests led to them to feel uncomfortable around him, and he didn't have much respect within the house. While he had some awareness of the house dynamics, unlike most of the other house guests this season, and knows a lot of the basics of Big Brother, I can't put him higher or lower since he isn't as solid or bad as a player, and he doesn't have potential in my opinion. We are skipping the solid tier because there's no one that fits that tier from this cast, and we're going to go straight to the good tier. And these are where a lot of the best BBCAN players end up ranking, since they have all or most of the skills that indicate a good Big Brother player, but are just missing something to put them in the top tier. And there's one person that fits that tier. At 3rd place is Adam. Out of everyone on this season, he is easily the most frustrating to talk about as a player, and just from looking at his skill set overall. I do think that he is overall a good player, hence him being on this tier, but he's a lot more inconsistent than I remembered, and is a lot more reliant on his alliance than I remember too, especially earlier on in the season. He had a huge target on him from the very beginning, and before this rewatch, I thought that it was mainly due to his affiliation with Samantha, but now that I've rewatched the season, a lot of it was due to his own actions outside of her. He came off as very intimidating, hot-headed, emotional, bro-centric, and some saw him as a sexist earlier on in the season, as many mentioned that he had no use for women if he didn't find them attractive. That, in addition to being in the bottom of his alliance the entire season, his more tunnel vision strategy and stubbornness has me worrying about him as a consistent player if he were to ever play again. At the same time, despite all of his many limitations, I do think he at the same time has a lot of potential, more than he realized during the season, and has had a lot of good qualities, and has a lot of good qualities overall. Despite his initially bad first impression, he was able to get along with many women throughout the season, like Chelsea, Samantha, and Corey, in addition to getting along with people who aren't like him in Kira. and his non-pretty boy allies were a lot more loyal to him than his own alliance. He did want his allies from both sides to work together during the season, which was an ideal strategy for him, but he didn't fight very hard to make it happen, and actively misled his more loyal allies, did more damage to his own game later on, when he became a lot more dependent on the untrustworthy Dane and Anthony. Outside of all that I just mentioned, Adam is one of the best competitors in Big Brother Canada history, and arguably in Big Brother history, since he had the disadvantage of not being able to play veto comps when he was HOH, and he won HOH a lot, meaning there were a lot of veto competitions that he was ineligible to play, where he probably would have won had he played in those competitions. In addition to that, Adam's social game improved tremendously as the season continued, as he won over many people who were rivals of his in the beginning, which isn't something many people have, and it got to the point where most of the jury were actively rooting for him to win. I think that Adam has all the pieces to be a great player, and those traits make him a good player, but he willfully chooses to not connect them well enough to be a great player. And the final tier on this list is the great tier, and as you've seen throughout my last 6 player tier rankings, it is very rare for me to put people on this tier, since there are very few great players and there are very few people who are able to piece things so well for Big Brother, like the people who I end up putting in this tier. At second place is Anthony. I almost didn't put him on this tier list fresh out of my rewatch, but after thinking about Emmett being on this tier from BBCAN7 and them having their fair share of similarities, it would not be fair of me to not have Anthony on this tier. It is encapsulating to see how quickly he picked up on virtually every single element of the game, despite him being a recruit who have never even watched Big Brother before. It just shows that you can be a super fan and not have the traits to do well in the game, and you can also never watch the show but have all of the skills to perform well. He caught on to the social elements well on people wanting to feel listened to and to feel important, caught onto the strategic element really well, knowing that you convince people to do what you want by making them feel like they came up with it, and always pitching for what would make sense for them. And he really picked up on how to manipulate his way through the house with his charm, and having a pulse on every single HOH in one way, shape, or form. He literally got in the ear of damn near every HOH in the house and everyone in general in the house, and gave them scripts not only just for nomination, veto, and eviction ceremonies, but in what they would say to other people that the two of them were having a conversation about. So for example, Anthony and Estefania, for example, were having a conversation together about Samantha, and he would give her scripts on what to say to Samantha in her conversation with her. That's just a prime example. Even if it didn't happen, I'm just using Anthony, Estefania, and Samantha as an example. The amount of control he had during the season without ever winning an HOH and only winning one veto competition is very impressive, and he managed to lay under the radar despite being a tall, muscular man, in addition to never being nominated throughout the entire season. At the same time, he did have a few very notable weaknesses. He did get pretty cocky and arrogant at times, and didn't handle things very well when things didn't go his way, like the week Corey left. But the main weaknesses he had was his lack of care about the meta element of Big Brother, like studying for competitions, which would come up in the endgame, needing to make his game visible so the jury could see what he did, and how to handle the jury, especially as they are leaving goodbye messages. But those are things that are easily fixable, especially with how involved he's been in the BBCAN community over the last few years, and obviously with him playing before and watching seasons since, he now gets the meta more, and none of it takes away from all of his skills. At number 1 is Dane. He is eons better than every other player in the season, and in a way, it makes him very boring for me to talk about, in my opinion. I remember from when the preseason happened, a lot of people predicted for him to be the winner of the season, since while he is muscular and has very bro-centric energy to him, as well as having the perception of being a himbo, he clearly had a lot of intelligence and cutthroat elements to him, and it helped that he was a lifelong fan, so he understood some of the meta elements that Anthony just simply didn't get. Socially, he was very great. While people like Adam and Anthony would have temper tantrums several times throughout the season and didn't know how to react to other people at times, he always kept himself calm, knew how to apologize to make it come off as sincere, and always placated everyone in their feelings in a way where it didn't rub them the wrong way. Many people liked his jockey personality, but didn't feel like he was only for the bros and not alienating people. He got away with lying about where he was voting in the tiebreaker to half the House, many of which were his allies, in the second week without a blink of an eye. He really just wanted to be in an alliance, but Adam brought him into a bro alliance that he and Anthony completely took over from beginning to end. Whenever people would even consider targeting him throughout the season, it was shut down completely by many people, even when it was logical for them to target him. There was literally no reason why he should have escaped the final five and not being evicted, but he managed to do it. So that is how I rank the players of Big Brother Canada 7, based on what they showed in the season, how they did in the season, and what I predict they would do in other seasons, based off the skill sets they showed here. Thankfully, I do not have to talk about the season anymore because I just don't care for it. Like I mentioned in my last video, I'm going to skip Big Brother Canada 8 because it isn't a complete product, and I'm going to move on to Big Brother 9, Big Brother Canada 10, and I'm sure I will finish those two after Big Brother Canada 11 finishes, where I can move right on to Big Brother Canada 11. And then I'll discuss all the seasons, and then I'll make a ranking on all the players. I might discuss BBCAN7 afterwards, but I'm not too sure about it. I did watch the new season of Total Drama, if anyone really cares, and I'm waiting for it to air in either the US or Canada, but there hasn't been any announcement as to when it's going to be released, so I might discuss my opinions on the season sooner than later and my review of it sooner than later. And of course, I'll rank the players there as well. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back soon with Big Brother Canada 9. Bye!